Today's project is the benchtop router table, and if it looks familiar, it shares a lot of the same construction techniques I used to build the horizontal router table in another video. The benchtop router table features an adjustable fence with removable dust collection, and I can make the whole thing from a 1/4 sheet of plywood. I'll start by ripping this 2 foot by 4 foot piece of 3/4 inch plywood in half lengthwise. And from one of the strips, I'll cut 4 pieces 9.5 inches wide. And from the other strip, I'll cut 3 pieces 16 inches wide. Two of the 16-inch pieces will be for the top and bottom, and the third 16-inch piece I'm going to rip into 2 1/4 inch wide strips for the fence. Along these 2 edges of both side pieces, I'm going to route shallow rabbets to house the front and back pieces. So the rabbets are going to be 1/8 of an inch deep, and the width will be the same as the thickness of the plywood, 3/4 of an inch. And that'll give me a better glue joint. And I'm going to assume you're wanting to build a router table because you don't already have one. So I'm going to use my handheld router with an edge guide rather than my regular router table to do this. Now the 2 back edges I'll glue together, but the front I want to leave loose. I will use it for keeping the box square though while I clamp it and the glue dries. For a smooth surface on the top, I've cut a piece of 1/8 inch masonite, slightly oversized, and I'll glue it to the top piece. To trim the masonite flush with the plywood, I'll use a flush trim bit like this. The bearing will follow the plywood edge and the cutter will trim the masonite. fence is going to consist of these 3 strips of 3/4 inch plywood, 16 inches long, 2 1/4 inches wide. I'm going to cut 2 of them 3 1/2 inches shorter than the third. And I'll glue all 3 pieces together with even exposure on the ends here. For the mechanism that will allow the fence to adjust, I'll drill a hole centered side to side, 1 inch in from each end. And I'll glue a piece of 1/8 inch masonite to the front face to give it a smooth surface. And I'll use the same flush trim bit to trim off the excess masonite. Next, I want to route grooves to house the 2 sides and rabbets along the front and back to house the front and back pieces. I've already started on the bottom. I routed the grooves, and I'll route grooves in the top now. Fits nicely. Now I'll route rabbets across the front and back of the top and bottom both. That's the way I like to see it fit. Next, I need to get this router insert into this tabletop. And this is a standard size insert, 11 3/4 by 9 1/4, and it's the same size as all my router table inserts. So I'm going to be able to swap out routers at will. Next up, how to get the insert into this tabletop. To inlet this router base plate into this router tabletop, I need to make a jig. So I've cut some strips of 3/4 inch plywood. These are about 2 1/2 inches wide. I cut 2 strips, the exact width of the base plate, and 2 more strips, large enough to make a frame. I'll join these with pocket hole joinery, and then I'll be able to use a pattern bit. This one has a bearing at the shank end, and the pattern bit will be able to run around inside the frame and route an exact size recess for the base plate. My pattern bit makes pretty tight corners. It's only a 1/2 inch in diameter. But my insert plate has corners about 1 3/8 inches in diameter. The problem with this is sawdust will get trapped down in here and start lifting up the corner of the router plate. So my solution is I've got an 1 3/8 inch Forstner bit. I'll use it to bore a hole in this 3/4 inch poplar and then cut it off. And that will leave me with these 4 corners like this. I'll glue those into the jig, and that will give me a better shaped recess for my insert plate. To fasten the jig to the tabletop, I'm drilling through from the bottom side. This is the back edge. I'm drilling for 2 screws on this side and 2 screws on the other side. 1 inch in from the side and 1 inch from the back edge, and again 6 inches from the back edge. So 2 screws here and 2 screws along the other edge. I did a little bit of sanding. I'll get this centered up on the top, and then I'll get it screwed down from underneath. I've also cut a center section. This will keep my router base from tipping as I'm doing the routing. It's also going to guide me around the inside edge. So I'll be routing this much. This is 1 inch smaller on all 4 sides. And once I'm finished routing, this center section will be cut out with a jigsaw. Nice fit. Where I drilled these screw holes before to mount the jig to the tabletop, I'm going to route between them with a 1/4 inch straight bit to route a 1/4 inch slot, and that's what's going to allow the fence to move back and forth. And then I'll be ready to glue it all together. And because I'll be using toilet bolts for the adjustment hardware, I'll route a 1/2 inch recess on the underside, only about 1/8 of an inch deep. A couple more things. I'll drill a 1-inch hole all the way through, and I'll cut out the sides at the bandsaw for bit clearance, and then I'll rig something up for dust collection. For my dust collection system, I'm going to start with a piece of 1/4 inch MDF, 3 3/8 of an inch wide. It's extra long, I'll cut it off later. And I've drilled a center hole for my small circle router jig. And I've got the router jig set for 2 1/4 inch diameter circle, large enough for my dust collection hose. And since this part of the router table is finished, might as well get some use out of it. The dust collector is pretty simple. The rabbited pieces I just made at the router table, and then some 1/4 inch MDF to enclose a box. and a couple of brass threaded inserts in the top of the fence, and that's how I'll fasten it. So let's try that cut at the router table again and see how it goes with dust collection. Much better. Before, all the sawdust and chips were flying out through the back of the fence and landing on my table. Pretty clean back there now. Guys, thanks for watching.